Hello and welcome to another episode. Today we're going to discuss something very interesting, the Spinocerebellar tract. One of the reasons why this is an interesting tract is because this is one of the fastest conducting tract. This tract can carry impulses as fast as 120 meter per second, and that is one of the fastest. You think of A alpha fibers, so that can from 70 to 120 meter per second is the maximum it can carry. So this can carry even up to 120 meter per second. So next question is, why does your spinocerebellar tract need to carry something this fast? So at any point of time, your cerebellum needs to be aware of what position your body is in, how much movement it is there, the rate to which it is moving, and its relation with the surrounding. And it uses all this information, compares it with the information which is coming from the cortex to coordinate your motor activity. And this is very important because a slight, minute lag can absolutely derail your motor activity. So this is why your spinocerebellar tract is a very important tract in your body. We have two spinocerebellar tracts. We have your dorsal as well as your ventral spinocerebellar tract. The dorsal spinocerebellar tract is the one that I had mentioned earlier about the one that carries impulses from the periphery. So when you talk about your muscle, joints, so all these sensations from all these areas from the periphery comes back, a feedback comes back to your cerebellum to let the cerebellum know about the position of all these things. So this sort of feedback that is coming to the cerebellum is through your dorsal spinocerebellar tract. So the question is, what does your ventral spinocerebellar tract do? So when we try to move something, your motor cortex is involved, and along with your motor cortex, you have your extrapyramidal tracts as well. So the final impulse that is reaching your lower motor neuron is the addition subtraction of all the impulses that are coming over there through the extrapyramidal as well as the pyramidal tract. So this impulse, which is finally coming to your alpha motor neuron or gamma motor neuron and finally resulting in some action. So this activity, the sum of all these impulses which are reaching your lower motor neuron, a copy of it, a copy of the action that is intended is sent back. So this is through your ventral spinocerebellar tract. So efferent copy which is reaching your anterior horn cell, for example. So we have dorsal spinocerebellar tract which relays information from the periphery to the cerebellum. We have ventral spinocerebellar tract which gives efferent copy of the impulses reaching the anterior horn cells. So in the consequent slides, we'll come to understand this a little more clearly. So let's take a look at this. So you do this experiment, you must be knowing this. So we look for position sense, we look for movement sense, and look at the joint movement. So a sense of all these things finally should reach your brain, cerebellum. So this is kind of through your muscle spindle, Golgi tendon organ, which relays a lot of information about how much the muscle is contracting or how much it is stretching, how much tension there is and all that. So all these impulses finally reach your cerebellum. So this is through your dorsospinal cerebellar tract. So this dorsal spinocerebellar tract is what carries such information from the periphery. Now apart from this, we have your ventral spinocerebellar tract. So when you look at ventral spinocerebellar tract, you can take this example. From the brain, we have the upper motor neurons which are giving impulses. This is going to reach your spinal cord where your lower motor neurons are there. So these lower motor neurons, in this example say alpha motor neuron, is going to get stimulated. It's going to go and activate the muscle for the intended activity. So along this way, the upper motor neuron is stimulating the lower motor neuron. So this upper motor neuron impulses that are reaching here, a copy of that impulse is going to go back to your brain. When the brain cerebellum. So this is through your ventral spinocerebellar tract. So earlier we had seen the dorsal spinocerebellar tract, which relays information from the periphery to the cerebellum, and the ventral spinocerebellar tract, which relays a efferent copy of the intended motor activity. So these are two different things. So let's just take a look at another diagram and try to understand the same thing again. You can see how from the brain the impulses reach the spinal cord segment, and these are the upper motor neurons which are finally reaching here, and a copy of this goes back through your ventral spinocerebellar tract, goes up and goes to the cerebellum. Okay, so this which is stimulating the lower motor neuron is eventually going to go down and stimulate the motor units it needs to activate. But while the intended activity is going on, a copy of it is just going back to your cerebellum. Along with that, through the dorsal spinocerebellar tract, the feedback from the periphery is also reaching. So two types of impulses are reaching your cerebellum. One is the intended activity, which is coming through the ventral spinocerebellar tract, and the second through the dorsal spinocerebellar tract. It gives an idea of how the periphery is reacting to it. Okay, so you can take a look at this diagram. This is from Guyton. You can see that it's mentioning a spinocerebellar tract over here. So this is a muscle that is here, and from the muscle you can see that some sort of feedback is going to your cerebellum. So this is again where students get confused. So this is a spinocerebellar tract. Which spinocerebellar tract could it be based on whatever I've explained so far? This is your dorsal spinocerebellar tract. Now, from the motor cortex, you can see that there are impulses going down all the way to your muscles. But something is quite not right here. The corticospinal tract, which is the upper motor neuron, should end at a lower motor neuron and go to the muscle. So I'll just draw over it. You can see the upper motor neuron fibers coming down. It is synapsing with the lower motor neuron, and the impulses that are reaching here, you can see that a copy of it goes to the cerebellum. So this is your ventral spinocerebellar tract. So this is a simplified version of the whole concept. Okay, now we'll take a look at each of the pathways a little in detail. In case the question comes, you can directly explain it through the diagram. So how much the muscle contracts. So this is dorsal spinocerebellar tract I'm talking about. So this gives information about, say, how much the muscle contracts, or what is the tension that is there on the muscle tendon, or the position or the rate of movements of the parts of the body, or the forces that are acting on the surface of the body. So all these information, these types of information are related to your cerebellum. So how much the muscle is contracting, how much tension there is in the muscle, the position, the rate of movement, the force acting on the surfaces of the body. Also, all these information gets relayed. So the most predominant is your muscle spindle, which is a receptor. Apart from that, say for example, the tension of the muscle tendon obviously is through your Golgi tendon organ. So the forces acting on the surface of the body, that again through your large tactile receptors. Then to understand about the joint movement, joint sense, the position sense, and all the different other receptors are there. Okay, so predominantly it's muscle spindle, but your dorsal spinocerebellar tract also takes impulses from these other receptors as well to understand all these things. Now it has reached your spinal cord. So where does it go to the spinal cord? So just like any other ascending tract, it goes through your dorsal root ganglia. It reaches over here, and over here there is a Clark cell. Can you see that? There's a Clark cell in the dorsal horn. So in the dorsal horn there's a Clark cell, and you can see that ipsilaterally through the same side it ascends through the dorsal spinocerebellar tract. So this whole thing will be in the lateral side over here like this. So this is the dorsal part, this is the ventral part. In the lateral side of the white matter, you can see that dorsally in the lateral segment of the white matter, this goes up. Okay, and another thing you have to notice, this is through inferior cerebellar peduncle. So this goes and reaches the cerebellum through the inferior cerebellar peduncle. So this is fairly simple. Okay. So if we were to take a look at all these neurons again, so in any ascending tract, there's usually going to be a first order neuron, a second order neuron, a third order neuron. So something similar is also over here, right? So there's a receptor over here. We got the afferent now. We got the first order neuron. This is the first neuron, which is going to synapse as a second neuron, which is a second order neuron, and which is going to now synapse as a third neuron, third order neuron. It's as simple as that. Okay. Here, this first order neuron is a dorsal root ganglia, which you know is a pseudo unipolar cell. Okay. So it has one pole which divides into two branches. One is the afferent branch over here, and this is the efferent. This gives impulses to the next neuron. Okay, so this is a pseudo unipolar cell, this neuron which is there in your dorsal root ganglia. Okay, so this is your first order neuron. It's the same here, no matter which ascending tract it is, this is going to be the same. Second order neuron I mentioned earlier is the Clark's column. So this is generally there between T1 to L3. So this is a column. It's a group of neurons which are located throughout the spinal cord in these segments that I mentioned. Okay, so this is where the second order neuron starts. So what about impulses coming from above that? So that is where something called Cuneo cerebellar, Cuneo spinocerebellar tracts are there. So this is dorsal spinocerebellar tract. Cuneo spinocerebellar tracts takes impulses from the cervical segment. So it's predominantly present between C1 to C4, and this actually gives information from the head and neck region, head, neck, shoulder region. Okay, so below that is your dorsal spinocerebellar tract through your Clark's column. Okay, and this finally goes and reaches the inferior cerebellar peduncle, and it goes in as a mossy fiber. So this mossy fiber is now going to go to your third order neuron. So this actually synapses at two different places. One is your deep nucleus, the other is a granule cell. So later when you talk about cerebellum, try to learn it, you'll understand this a little bit in detail. Okay, so just looking at it and brushing through it very briefly, you have your granule cell over here. Over here you can see the deep nucleus. Okay, so these are things that are there inside the cerebellum. So this is the granule cell, this is the deep nucleus. Now from the mossy fiber input, it is going to go synapse with the granule cell, it is going to go synapse with the deep nucleus. Okay, later we'll try to understand how cerebellum acts. This goes through a slower pathway later and finally inhibits this whole thing. Okay, so we'll come to that later. Okay, so that was your dorsal spinocerebellar tract. It goes ipsilaterally, it goes to the inferior cerebellar peduncle. Okay, now we'll go to your ventral spinocerebellar tract. So ventral spinocerebellar tract, what does it do? The motor signals that are arriving at the anterior onset. So in the lower motor neuron. Okay, so whatever impulses that are reaching the lower motor neuron, a efferent copy of that comes up. So say for example, I'm moving my upper limb, this distal muscle, and I'm flexing it. So upper limb flexes distal muscles. Okay, so what else should be involved in this? Obviously your corticospinal tract, and the extrapyramidal tract which is involved with it will be your rubrospinal tract. So we have the rubrospinal tract and the corticospinal tract, the lateral corticospinal tract to be more precise, acting to flex this distal muscles in the upper limb. Okay, so these impulses are reaching over here, these motor signals are reaching over here. Apart from that, there is something called internal motor pattern generator in the cord itself. Okay, so what that means is inside your spinal cord, there are certain pattern generators which are present. So there have been studies which have been done in animals. So you take the whole region of the upper motor neuron, keep the lower motor neuron, that is the spinal cord, just the spinal cord. Okay. Now, if you were to keep such an animal and place that animal on a treadmill without influence of the corticospinal tract. Okay, without the influence of the corticospinal tract, if you were to keep this animal on a treadmill, just by the touch, the uh, animal can still do primitive movements to support itself. And it was shown that these impulses arise somewhere from your spinal cord. So, in the presence of obvious upper motor neuron activity, this is not going to be there much, but you should know that there are also pattern generators in the cord. Okay, so the impulses from the corticospinal tract along with the rubrospinal tract, which is making these muscles move, along with the internal motor pattern generators in the cord. So these are arriving in the anterior horns. Okay, now efference copy of this is going to your spinal cord. Now once it goes to the spinal cord, what you can see is, unlike earlier where it went ipsilaterally, this is now going to go contralateral. Once it reaches here, once the second order neuron has started, it is going contralaterally and ascending up. Also, part of it goes ipsilaterally, but predominantly it goes contralaterally. Okay, so this is a diagram which is coming from Guyton's textbook. Now this can confuse students a little bit, so I'll just try to simplify it. So what I'm telling you is going to be based on information from a lot of articles that I read, review articles as recent as 2020. And also I read Gray's Anatomy. So later I'll show you a diagram from Gray's Anatomy and try to explain the same thing. Okay, so let's take a look at this. I'll draw over this to make it easier for you. So impulses, efference copy from the second order neuron is now going to go contralaterally. It is going to go in the contralateral white matter, not on the same side. Okay, and earlier we had seen the dorsal spinocerebellar tract that goes in the lateral part in the dorsal, but compared to that, in the lateral part, this goes more ventrally. So that is why this is the ventral spinocerebellar tract, and the one going a little more dorsally in the white matter of the lateral side is the dorsal spinocerebellar tract. So this now ascends in the contralateral white matter, and it crosses again. When it reaches the superior cerebellar peduncle, it crosses again and goes to the other side cerebellum. So ultimately, it finally goes back to the same side, ipsilateral. So all studies kind of show that majority of the impulses, even in your ventral spinocerebellar tract, goes ipsilaterally. Okay, there are fibers going from the same side directly, but majority of the fibers go contralateral and then again cross over to the other side a second time and ultimately end up in the ipsilateral segment. Okay, so this is the diagram from Gray's Anatomy that I mentioned. So you can see here the Clark's column, the neuron. So this Clark cell, from there it is going to ascend ipsilaterally, go up and through the inferior cerebellar peduncle, it is going and reaching the cerebellum. So predominantly in the vermis, paravermis regions. So this would be a dorsal spinocerebellar tract. On the other hand, you can see over here the impulses carrying the efference copy. These are going to go cross over to the other side contralaterally, and you can see how they're going in the contralateral white matter. Now once it reaches the superior cerebellar peduncle, so it goes above pons, reaches the midbrain. So over there the superior cerebellar peduncle is there, and then after that you can see that this ventral spinocerebellar tract is going to go down and it is going to cross over from here. It's going to cross over and go to the other side. So ultimately this and where it stimulates are the same side. Okay, now you can see here the Cuneo cerebellar tract as well. So this is your dorsal spinocerebellar tract, which is coming from lower regions T1 to L3, and the ones above that's predominantly C1 to C4, that is your Cuneo cerebellar tract. So both of this goes ipsilaterally. So this like this, both from the periphery and from the intended movements from your cortex are both computed, compared by your cerebellum through your dorsal as well as your ventral spinocerebellar tract. Okay, I hope I made the topic fairly simple for you guys. In case you guys have any queries, you can drop in a comment anytime or text me directly on Instagram or anything. And if you found this useful, please do share, drop in a like, and that's it. Thank you.